and what that felt like and looked like and lived like for Black folk in this neighborhood was terrorism. It was the criminalization of Black life, the criminalization of Black existence. And that is what led to the death of George Floyd.
Welcome to Fight Back Radio, a production of fightbacknews.org, taking you to the heart of the people's struggle. I'm your host, Richard Berg, and today we have a great show for y'all, and we got Marcia Howard, who is one of the key people in the whole struggle after George Floyd in Minneapolis, and keeping George Floyd Square alive and really keeping the fight within the community as well as other sections, labor movement, etc. You'll hear all about this. Before we get into it, though, I want to raise an issue that's happened in Tampa, Florida, that's disturbing and should be disturbing to all Fight Back Radio listeners. The people in Students for Democratic Society called for a protest at the University of South Florida. And it was a peaceful protest. They were calling for diversity and inclusion. Some of you have heard or read about all the craziness that's going on in Florida these days with the extreme right-wing laws. But they were calling for, hey, look, we want to learn about Black history. We want Black studies programs. We want programs that include, gender diversity discussions, and we want curriculum that teach us the truth about the world and allow us to debate and discuss the truth about the world. And so they were calling for these kinds of things, and their protest was violently attacked by the police. And the police ended up arresting 4 members of the Students for a Democratic Society. Their charges are pending, but they're out on bail right now. And we're trying to raise money for bail. They need to raise $11,000, which students that's hard for a student to do, and even the recently graduated often have huge debts. So we're going to put in the show notes how you can support the Tampa 4, and how you can help send money or whatever, and any other kind of support that we can do for them. And we encourage you to do that. Some of you may have read about this in fightbacknews.org, and I encourage you to continue to follow us, follow the developments of the Tampa 4 in Fight Back News, where it'll be reported. So thank you all for that. I want to go back, though, to our guest today. Marcia Howard is the first vice president of the Minneapolis Federation of Teachers Local 59. But more importantly, or as importantly, she's been a leader in her neighborhood in Minneapolis for many years. She lives just blocks away from where George Floyd was murdered. One of her students was the one who filmed the film that many of us saw and were horrified by seeing. And she's just been a ferocious fighter for the people and for the community since then. You'll hear a lot of the things that if you don't live in Minneapolis, or even if you do, the things that are not widely known about how they, in the aftermath of George Floyd's death. She'll also talk a little bit about the strike that happened in Minneapolis with the Minneapolis Federation of Teachers. We had recently on the show Greta Callahan, who's the president of that local, and Greta actually said, "Look, you got to have Marcia on this show," and she was pretty insistent, and so we did. We in fact are complying with her wish today. I encourage you to go back to listen to Greta's show if you haven't already, to learn about the strike as well. But Marcia gives a new twist on it, and also especially, like I said, this thing about George Floyd. And just before we go to the interview, I want to say every activist I've met in Minneapolis, or people that have been to Minneapolis, told me, you got to have Marcia Howard on your show. And I just met her through this interview for the first time, but boy, were they right. Greta, like I said, insisted on it. My union sister, Tennille Evans from the Chicago Teachers Union, who was up there helping out during their strike, said, you got to have, as soon as she found out I had a podcast or was hosting one, you got to have Marcia Howard on. And you won't regret listening to this interview. So thank you so much, Marcia. And here's Marcia Howard. So welcome, Marcia Howard, to Fight Back Radio.
Hi, how are you?
Oh, I'm doing great, and thank you for taking time away from the occupation of George Floyd Square to be with Fight Back Radio today.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here, and it's really cold outside. So,
so we'll give you a short break from your occupation duties. So let's talk a little bit about that, though. I want to go back to March 25th, 2020, with lynching of George Floyd. And could you tell us a little bit for our Fight Back Radio listeners who don't live in the Twin Cities, basically, from your perspective, what that day, what happened that day, and in the aftermath of that, how did things progress?
Well, to be honest, it was May 25th, 2025. And frankly, I was a teacher and we were in the middle of COVID and I was teaching on my front porch. One of my former students filmed a lynching, basically. The police had killed a black man at the corner store. And that store is about 263 feet from my front door. I live around the corner from 38th in Chicago. And one of my students filmed his death. And the very next day, I saw tens, then hundreds, and then thousands of people flood into that intersection to protest what they saw and judged to be a pretty flagrant display of police brutality. And I'm going to be honest, I am the most bougie, middle class, A-line skirt wearing with kitten heels school mom that you would ever see. And so all I did that first few days as our city started to burn in outrage was hand out hand sanitizer and face masks to the passersby. But then the city and the state sent a phalanx of police down my street, and they started to attack the people that were peacefully protesting on the corner. And I just had to get out there, and I stayed out there. I literally did a social media post where I told my students, hey, you all passed, stay safe. I'm out here fighting.
And
I've been out there since. We established an autonomous zone. Barricades were installed. We continue to protest. And then they told us to leave. And we said no. And then they said, why not? Why aren't you going? I said, because we must stay for justice. Then they asked us a question. They shouldn't have asked us, what does justice look like? So we ran up and down the streets, in and out of businesses. We asked homeowners and people in apartments. We asked the brothers on the street, what do you want? What do you need to survive and thrive in an area, in a part of the city that has been so disenfranchised, so over-policed, so over-promised and under-delivered? And all the answers became the 24 demands of Justice Resolution 001. And we presented it to City Council and to the mayor and to our senator and our Congress people and to the governor and to the then President Donald Trump.
Could you talk a little bit about what was in there? What were some types of demands, or give a little bit of an example of that?
The demands run a gamut from things that had to do with hyper-local situations, including, let's say, number one, which was we wanted Mike Freeman, the local prosecutor, to be fired for egregiously unprofessional conduct. We also wanted certain members of BCA, the Bureau of Criminal Investigations, to be fired because of a pattern of them basically being in cahoots with the very same police that they were supposed to be investigating and holding accountable. Number four, which was given to us by a business owner, we wanted an investigation into Amy Klobuchar's railroading of a young man, Mayan Burrell, for the death of Taisha Edwards. There were so
So
many
Amy
things about
Klobuchar
it.
is the senator from Minnesota
Yes,
who was running for president just
at the
recently.
time. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, she was running for president. The demands ran from investigating the murder of a man June 19th at 38th in Chicago during a Juneteenth festival. The police came in and their conduct was absolutely deplorable, and we wanted that investigated. Those 24 demands were then taken upon by city officials, and they started cracking. They started working on them because where there was people, there was power. And we were currently occupying the epicenter of a global social justice movement. It wasn't just burning in Minneapolis, Greece and France and England. We had support from Romania. There were protests all over the world, one of the largest rallies ever in Germany since World War II, on
Wow.
behalf of
Wow.
Black lives.
No, that's
Our,
incredible. That's
yeah,
incredible. I mean, in Chicago, where I live, that we saw that too. The whole, the mayor shut down the downtown area, and raised the bridges, and whatever, became criminal to be in the Loop, which is in downtown Chicago. But I'm sorry, go on. The power of the people promoting these demands. You were talking about that.
but we didn't just stop at making demands. We were in a time outside of time to be at 38th in Chicago and to be in what we now call George Floyd Square. Remember, we were without municipal support. We had for a time, no mail delivery. We did not have police. We did not have ambulances. We basically had to triage for ourselves. We came up with medical clinics. We found ways to tote people out, military style, when they had wounds, even gunshot wounds, when there were items coming up missing or robbery or whatever. You couldn't call 411 or 311 or even 911 because the police did sort of a blue flu and stopped answering calls around the square. They seemed to want to punish citizens of Minneapolis for supporting our endeavors by denying them service that their tax dollars paid for. Y'all don't like us, how you like these apples? And what was surprising was the way in which we coped without their services at all. I think that shocked them and then became a matter of consternation for them. And 3 years later, we are still here. 3 years later, we still stand.
Wow. I mean, so well, could you talk a little bit about some of the most difficult times during that time? How did you cope with that? How did you deal with those things?
I don't think I can chalk it up to a particular time. Obviously, as an autonomous zone where we had to navigate making sure that people who live within the barricades did not feel constrained, because there are a lot of people of color and indigenous people, immigrant population that are in here, and even just your run-of-the-mill middle class Minnesotan who lived here and didn't realize that they were going to be at this epicenter of a resistance movement. And one of the analogies that we made was like, I don't know who lived near any major battle that you could imagine in American history. When they stormed the beach in Normandy, nobody gave a crap about the fishmonger who was losing business.
Mm-hmm.
But what we didn't want to do was be callous in our regard to people who lived here and didn't realize that Minneapolis police was going to set off such a conflagration. We made it very, 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 very much a priority to make sure that we were able to open and close the gates at demand. As soon as those homeowners wanted to come in and out, we were there to open and close the gates. They called this across the nation a no-go zone. And what that meant was that we were illegally occupying, and it became this sort of like den of iniquity. They wanted to paint this as a bunch of militant leftists who were walking around like shock troops, when in fact, I am a 49-year-old high school teacher. I am also a retired Marine. And so the militancy by which we held this land this area, this gained ground of, by the way, unceded Dakota territory. That became part of the sort of lore, like, oh, wow, those people are dangerous, when in fact, we are just neighbors. I am a homeowner, I am a taxpayer, and I'm also a Black woman who was sick and tired of Black folks being killed in the city of Minneapolis. And so I stood.
So how did this progress then? So you had a very sharp confrontation at the start of this, it sounds like, and then you made demands. How have some of the demands had success, or where's that struggle at right now? And then the conflict with the city of Minneapolis and with the police department or whoever was cutting off services and making things difficult for you at 38th in Chicago. How has that progressed from then, till now?
I think what was interesting and remains extremely interesting to people who look in on George Floyd Square as an autonomous zone, we were the only ones that stayed. I mean, Chaz, Chop, the one that was established in Atlanta, Breeway, all of them rose and then they fell. And I think what made this different was that it was a zone and it has been a place of resistance that is established by the residents. And so the same people that we put the demands toward also answer to me as a constituent. They answer to my neighbors who also stand at George Floyd Square. We are the people that voted them in, and we can be the people that vote them out, let alone stand in political occupation. And so they took us seriously from the very beginning. Not for nothing, I am a high school teacher. I am a union member. I am a neighbor and a good neighbor. And I had already had an established reputation as just a run-of-the-mill middle-class woman that actually lives here. And so they started taking everyone in this occupation seriously and began negotiations. And as we got our demands met, with the idea that once all 24 were met, we'd be out of there. I don't want their street. I want justice. We didn't want the fist. We want justice. And so as they started meeting those demands, we did something differently than I think they expected. And we still continue to do things differently. And here's this difference. I think there's an expectation that when a small group starts making demands, as they win, they will run to the mountaintop and go about it. They'll beat their chest and laud themselves for their victory. But from the very beginning, they asked us, of the 24 demands, list 4 that would be our top 4 demands. We said, well, there are 24. No. If you could get 3 of these demands, which 3 would you get? It's 24. So from the very beginning, they were attempting to negotiate us and move us a little bit further from what our goals actually were. And so what we decided to do was not play into any of it. There are 24 demands. And as we negotiate, mind you, I'm a union member. I understand how negotiations work. You're not going to win everything, but we're standing for all of it. And so as we begin getting gains, the ones that we couldn't hide, we admitted to. The ones that we didn't have to beat our chest about and crow in victory, we have yet to acknowledge. We were not going to pat the city or the county or the state or even the federal government for doing the things that they should have been doing in the first place. So if number 3 came and they did a federal investigation of Minneapolis police, thank you, but we're not about to make a social media post about it. You did it because you should have done it a long time ago. So if number 4 came about and Mayan Burrell was freed from a life imprisonment sentence and walked out of prison and walked into George Floyd Square to thank us. His family and community had been working for his freedom for years. And there was this incendiary article from AP after like a lot of investigation that realized how much was done wrong by this young man. And he walked out of prison. I got a phone call from a power that be. You should be so happy with this victory. And it was almost as if they waited for us to say, yay, now we'll leave. I said, thank you for number 4. There are 24 demands. And as each one got met and as each one gets met, we don't even acknowledge it. I'm not giving you a cookie or a pat on the head for doing something that you should have already done, because those 24 demands address historic and systemic wrong. So, no, it's not, you're not getting a reward for doing the things that you should have done. But if you want us gone, you're going to get cracking and get it done.
Oh, that's wonderful. I mean, I think it's correct too. I mean, it's like, why thank the oppressor for lessening the oppression for a minute. But I will, I applaud you and and the other people who are in the movement who are fighting for justice and making progress, because that is something that's important. So it's interesting and important, I think, that the way you really focused in on the community and put them first in this. There are other forces. You've mentioned organized labor that have been supportive. Could you talk a little bit about that and how that's mixed with the community? And sometimes, they may have been when they did things that were really good, or if they were tone deaf, how you kind of brought them in line, or if those kinds of things happened.
I need you to think back to May and June and July of 2020. When we were out there, we had to be our own security when there were hordes of white supremacists coming through, trying to be inflammatory, trying to egg us on. We formed our own security corps, not just at 38th Street, but also in surrounding areas. So each neighborhood had different teams of folks that gathered together in order to protect their own neighborhoods. And this basically was girded up by people who were in the working class, people who were already union members. And so the you cannot separate the fight that we had for Black lives and the fight that we're still in from the union members, that rank and file union members that have been a huge support of this fight. And what we realize, what I've always known, is that it is the same fight. And it always has been the same fight. And so when I did not go back to work that fall, I took a leave of absence. I did a sick leave. My union called me and said, we want to support you. And they didn't just support me by coming into the square dressed in our union blue, many people. I also was able to be an organizer while still at George Floyd Square and keep my income. People don't talk about the fact that, yeah, you can be a revolutionary all day long, but your rent still got to get paid.
Yeah,
right?
That's right.
And so being able to be so steadfast and vigilant in this fight was in large part because my union helped me. I cannot stress enough the fact that our union gives us a framework on how to make demands, how to go into negotiations. I've been in the mayor's office. I've been secreted the attorney general into my backyard for negotiations. I've been in hidey holes in a refurbished theater with our state representative. All of these negotiations with these folks wasn't really new to me because I had been an active union member. And so right before I made the decision to go back to work, I talked to people in the union and I said I wanted to get more involved. And there were talks bandied about me running for office in my union. And so I ran for first vice president of my union and somehow won.
Oh, congratulations.
Congratulations.
Mm. No, that's and it's clearly it's this intersection between the union and the community around George Floyd. Obviously, you've been amongst the most active, so it's not surprising to me that you were elected first vice president. Can you talk a little bit more about that, though? About besides Minneapolis Federation of Teachers. Did other sections of organized labor, did they come out to the square? Did they show support, or what was the reaction of the Minneapolis Federation of Labor or St. Paul Fed or some of those?
Absolutely. While we have held this so-called autonomous zone, we also continued with festivals and family events and all the things that build community, because that was and has been a huge part of this fight. We are trying to imagine a world beyond the world that we live in, a world beyond traditional policing. And what that meant was we're doing May Day at George Floyd Square. And so Carpenters Union, AFSCME, all of our local union leaders came into George Floyd Square and continue to use this place as sort of a town square for the city of Minneapolis. And so they were having workshops, they had kids building things. We had a wonderful May Day celebration. The admin sent people down. AFT, Randy Weingartner has come multiple times, has committed funds for internships at George Floyd
national
Square.
President of the AFT, yes.
Exactly,
Sure.
exactly. And so I know I can't do this without my union siblings. And in turn, when they ask us, people from George Floyd Square, to come and support what they've done, we show up. We show up when Trader Joe's had voted to go in the union, Starbucks have gone in the union. They have been supported by GFS. Somehow, some way, GFS, George Floyd Square, is renowned for being a place of resistance and protest for Black lives, Indigenous lives, people of color, but it also is a strong bulwark for labor in Minneapolis. And so I'm proud of that. I'm proud of the fact that union leaders feel comfortable coming by the fire to talk strategy, feel comfortable asking us to show up for their picket lines, and we do.
So let me ask you also then about, and that's fabulous. I think that's very important. I wanted to go back to the neighborhood a little bit though. If you go to 38th in Chicago, first, the people that live there, can you talk a little bit about, is it working class neighborhood or, middle class, or who lives there, and you talked about the important role they've played in this autonomy. But also, I mean, I had the good fortune of visiting there some time ago, and it's it's not just a corner. All kinds of could you talk a little bit about the visuals? There's a cemetery ish thing there, and mural. Could you talk a little bit about what it looks like and how that came to be, and the transformation of 38th in Chicago into George Floyd Square? How did that visually and otherwise happen?
I think when people think of George Floyd Square at 38th and Chicago Avenue in Minneapolis, Minnesota, they think of the fist that stands in the middle of an intersection. That fist was brought there the first week of the protest. It inched its way down to the middle of that intersection and became surrounded by flowers. And so that fist, that brown Black Power fist that stands there, actually stands at the epicenter of 4 separate neighborhoods: Bancroft, Bryant, Central, and Powderhorn neighborhood. And those neighborhoods have historically been separated by race and class, Bancroft being predominantly white. And my neighborhood, the Bryant neighborhood, had always been, I say always because of my short life, it's been a Black neighborhood. But turns out in the 1930s, Arthur and Edith Lee moved in. Arthur was a war veteran who was also Black. He bought the house sight unseen on 46 and Columbus Avenue. And when the white neighbors realized that the covenant had been broken, and that covenant said no Blacks, no Asians, no Jews, they surrounded his house, 3,000 people strong, and sat there. They threw racial epithets and Black paint and excrement against this Black man's house. It wasn't until his Union brothers from the United States Postal Service stood with their hands locked around his house that he was able to sleep in the basement, he and his family, but they were. And Minneapolis police were the ones who walked his daughter to school every day the 3 years that his front yard was occupied by white neighbors who were aghast that a black man had the audacity to move into the Bryant neighborhood. Imagine my surprise when I moved on that same street a few blocks up, and there was also a covenant on the deed of the house that I bought. And so when I sit my black ass down in my house, I think about Arthur Lee and the fact that I'm in the Bryant neighborhood, that as soon as he moved in, white folks started moving out and it became a black neighborhood. But funnily enough, in the 2000s, especially around the crash in '08, my black neighbors started losing their homes to predatory lenders. And my neighbors started looking different. And as all these houses got surrounded by folks who were like eager artists, queer folks, white folks, yoga instructors, all of them, they moved in. It did change the tenor of this neighborhood era of policing. Because what happens when you have an influx of white neighbors? The expectation that things will be policed. So if something goes bump in the night, there's going to be third precinct right there, right? To quote unquote, fix it. And what that felt like and looked like and lived like for Black folk in this neighborhood was terrorism. It was the criminalization of Black life, the criminalization of Black existence. And that is what led to the death of George Floyd. The idea that the police could do a summary execution with impunity, because Derek Chauvin kneeled on that man's neck with the idea that he would not get in trouble. At one point, put his hands in his pocket and smugly looked at Darnella while she filmed him. That was not a man who thought he'd be held accountable. And so demand number 24 is that all 4 officers that stood on George Floyd are to be convicted.
Yeah.
Tutal is the last one. He is yet to be convicted by the state of Minnesota.
My gosh, thank you for that history too, because it gives context to what people, to what actually happened there that day. It's also, there's a history in Minneapolis. I don't know the geography of the city, and I appreciate that you just laid it out for us, at least that area. But Philando Castile and others, could you talk a little bit about some of the history of police relations with the community? And I think you just did, but in a broader sense, in a more recent sense, and how that led to what happened on May 25th, 2020.
I think in order to talk about that, you need to talk about the state of Minnesota and the fact that it rested on its progressive laurels for much too long. Minnesota had been known, let's be honest, as the hometown of Prince and lakes and loons and, the great frozen north. It was known for Minnesota Nice and Lutheran charity. And yet underneath all of that, race relations had been horrible, and that was manifest in the way in which people were policed in the city of Minneapolis and St. Paul. The fact that Jamar Clark and the protest and occupation of 18 days is a thing that people know, that Philando Castile is a household name, that this man who was legally able to own a gun, who had been stopped 32 times, even though he wasn't even ticketed 32 times, and then finally murdered in his own car in front of his own child. That's a household name. People across the country know about Philando Castile. And that was a pattern of behavior that the rest of the country was just figuring out. So when George Floyd was lynched, and it became this viral moment and this worldwide catalyst for uprising and protest, what we came to know is that this was not just a singular incident. It was part and parcel of a pattern of behavior that Third Precinct and the Minneapolis police had with its Black residents. I live in the Bryant neighborhood, and I can tell you that throughout the 90s, there were so many incidents of police tagging and bagging Black folk in this neighborhood, to the point where they had initiatives called the blood drives, where they were going to tackle the gang. They had a gang task force that was eventually disbanded because it was so corrupt that when they were disbanded, they had vehicles, money, jewelry that they had stolen from random Black people throughout the course of that initiative. So the gang task force were basically state-sponsored thieves. They were bandits in the city of Minneapolis. And so many Black men went to jail in the 90s off snitching, which wasn't, I commit a crime, you commit a crime, and one of us tells on each other. It was, you got picked up by what they call a jump out boy, a police that jumps out an unmarked vehicle, puts you in a car and say, if you don't give me 4 names, you're going to jail for life. And so that type of snitching, which is basically you incriminating people who didn't deserve it, fomented such resentment that it actually was the seed that the MPD later harvested because of the resentment. If I get out of jail knowing that I was put in jail for no good reason, I'm looking for the person that put me in jail. It was the way that they could harvest criminals later. And that pattern is not just in Minnesota. We have found out they've done it in Chicago. They do it in LA. It's a way of them creating what they want, which is more people to incarcerate. Knowing that, then what we tried to do is countervail all of it. We did not want people putting themselves at risk during our occupation. And so we came up with protocols for how, not for behavior, but the way in which we accept information as it was coming to us, and other people's behavior as it was coming to us. We just assume that not everybody has our idea of liberation in mind. And so if somebody were to come to us unregulated, we're thinking about that all the time, that everyone has a right to exist in the way that they are, as long as they're not doing harm to us or the community, we good. And so I think that people were sent into George Floyd Square thinking that they were going to lob some sort of metaphorical bomb and cause us to act outside of ourselves. They wanted us to implode. They wanted us to go at each other, and it has not happened. They tried to pit the white militant leftists against the brothers on the street, the bougie middle class, educated folk against the folks that were working class. It didn't work. The Black against the Asian, the Native against the white. It did not work, and it does not work because, again, we are forging a new way of building community and sustaining it.
That's incredible, because you're right. That's exactly our movements have fallen down over this, and the fact that you're finding ways to overcome that and to deal with whatever legitimate differences of opinion and ways to go forward and to use it as a strength rather than let it break you apart is very important. Let me ask you about you said earlier that you were a teacher. Through all of this, how has this affected, and we had a pandemic too, I might add, how has this affected, your students, and how do you talk to your students about these kind of issues, these kind of very difficult issues sometimes for younger minds or ones with less experience anyways?
I think there isn't truly a didactic way of approaching this issue, especially with all this controversy about critical race theory. And Dr. Crenshaw, Kimberly Crenshaw, actually was at George Floyd Square, so I got to meet her. But
one of the most prominent critical race theory writers and whatever proponents. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
She's the one that developed it. Yes. But with all of that talk, I don't have to explicitly go into these issues because they have been woven throughout my curriculum and my lessons and my very existence. And real talk, it has been that way for the last 24 years of my career. And
Hmm.
so them knowing who I am and what I do once I leave that classroom, I come to school every single day smelling like a fire, because I start the fire at George Floyd Square in the morning. We hold a meeting in the morning before I even go to work. My shift used to be on the barricades at 3 a.m., but on June 3rd of 2021, they opened the streets up. Um, they did it in a way that we immediately fought back and start putting the barricades back on. It was back and forth. So the streets are technically open, yet we still stand. We are still occupying. And they're like, darn it, we thought that was going to work. And so I got to get up and occupy. That square is occupied 24/7. And when my shift starts, I go there first, and then I will go to school smelling like a fire. But to speak to how they feel, you need to understand that in March of 2020, many of my students were in the 7th or 8th grade, and were given a letter saying they had to go home for a week. And that turned into COVID and them being out of school for the rest of that school year. And then in May, the city was in crisis because of the uprising, and people were cut off from grocery stores and hospitals and uh, restaurants and other services. And they were scared. They were scared because you turn on social media or the TV, and the world was in an uproar. And then the next year, they did not go to school. Many kids were doing distance learning, and many folks will tell you not a lot of learning was being done. And so the very next year, they get back to school, and this is the first time where it actually um, felt like, okay, we're in school now. And then the teachers went on strike. It seems as if my students have been on a spring surprise every single year for the last 3 years, to the point where a student says, I think my brain is on academic furlough. I and that expression, the body keeps score, I think they almost have a muscle memory every spring that something is about to happen. And you can feel it in the air, and it's almost as if they're reverberating in their seats, because they anticipate something. And so we just had a massive security breach. And this kids had to go home for a week while the district dealt with that. And it's not really truly dealt with. But as a union leader, I took it upon myself March 1st to say, lock everything down, protect yourselves. I want this to be as painless as possible, if we can help it. So
Yeah.
MFT was on the case.
It's interesting. Yes. Well, let me. You're a leader in the Minneapolis Federation of Teachers, and you just mentioned the strike that happened there. And so let me pivot a little bit into that, and because I wanted to get your perspective, since we have the opportunity to talk to you on Fight Back Radio here about what are the things that led to the strike of the Minneapolis Federation of Teachers, and it was, I mean, again, it was you've made national and international news a couple of times here, because both through the strike and through the work you've done with around in the aftermath of George Floyd's lynching. But could you talk about the strike a little bit, and why did teachers in Minneapolis feel that they needed to walk the picket lines and to walk out of the classrooms?
That strike was a long time coming. Minneapolis public schools have spent probably the last 20 years just basically squeezing the life out of the art of teaching by underfunding us, and making sure that the conditions for teaching were not conducive for us to do our job. Teaching for me is not just a career, it is my calling. It is everything that I am as a person. And so when the rumbling started about us maybe going on strike, I really didn't believe that we would have the chutzpah to actually do it. It had been 51 years since Minneapolis had gone on strike. Granted, St. Paul had done a successful strike the year before, but I really didn't think we were going to do it. And I give a lot of credit, frankly, to the protests that had been going on in the city of Minneapolis. Teachers from Minneapolis had been in the street for Black lives the whole year prior. And they finally got up the courage to be in the street for themselves, to fight for what they thought was right for the kids and for the community and for their own careers. And so I almost think that the George Floyd uprising sort of gave them a training ground for how do you stand your ground for something that you believe in. And so we did. We took a strike vote, it passed, and we got out there and we were outside in the blistering cold for 3 weeks. And the things that we were fighting for, smaller classrooms, safer conditions, for more counselors, for retaining and recruiting Black educators and people of color to better reflect our student body. I mean, come on, in the metro area, half the students, 50% of our students are kids of color or indigenous kids, right? But only, 11% of the teachers are. It's ridiculous. I've been in the same school for 24 years, and I can count on one hand how many people were more than one hand of color, even when my school was 75% kids of color and indigenous. It is a problem. It is a problem. And the only way that we're going to fight it is through bargaining and movement of labor. Where there's people, there's power. And in our union, we have a lot of teachers who are able to stand in solidarity with each other to leverage that sort of power. And they started feeling themselves. They started feeling the effects of that power. And we didn't win everything, which means yesterday we went to the Capitol and let the senators and the House members know that not only did Minneapolis file to bargain yesterday, but so did Osseo, so did Dakota County, so did other districts. We all filed on the same day. And as our president, Greta Callahan of MFT 59 says, if we can do that together, imagine what we can all do together. So 6 unions went and filed yesterday. And we're letting legislators know that they need to fully fund public schools so that we don't have to play these games. But just know that we are laborers and we demand to be given everything we need to do our jobs. And that includes more pay, that includes being equitable, that includes more provisions for our students. We've gotten a lot of gains in Minnesota on all types of issues, but I honestly believe that it's not for nothing that Minnesota has been making a lot of gains in labor right now. So a lot of other corporations are feeling that sort of solidarity spirit, and they're trembling with it, because between Amazon and Starbucks and Trader Joe's and a few others that I shall name, but no, I'm not going to name them, because whatever surprises that they hold, I want it to hit like a boulder when it does come down. We're not playing around with labor. I went to a conference and someone on a panel had said, well, the labor movement seems to be sort of dying out a little bit. And I looked askance and I'm like, what are you saying? Where you been? Where you been? We are starting to feel our power. And I honestly believe that if we fight, we will win. But we need to fight smart, and we need to stay strong, and we need to stay committed to this idea that we are in a labor movement, which means we must always be working towards getting what we need for the person on the float. We need to look at ourselves as laborers. I don't care if we're a nurse or in another feminized profession, we're laborers, and we need to start acting like it.
Yeah, no, it's this issue of solidarity that you're saying here, I think is important. You're not just looking across professions, but also, the thing you mentioned about 6 unions filing to go on strike, or to bargain, I guess, together at the same time. And I think it goes back to even what you were saying about how they tried to attack you at George Floyd Square, where they tried to divide, whatever, militant whites from, middle class. I forgot how you said it, but you were talking about different sections of people that were coming to support. Can you say a little bit about why that's important and how you see that going forward?
I think that solidarity is so critical because united we stand. This is so trite, but united we stand and divided we fall. One of the things that made our strike for MFT so successful is that we realized that although we were different bargaining units, the ESPs, educational support professionals, and the teachers made a market difference in income. And a lot of people chalk that up to, well, we're licensed and we have more education. And yet, what it looked like were the people of color who have been the backbone of what we do as educators in schools were getting a third of our pay. And because they were different bargaining units, it would have been very easy for them to say, well, y'all are the bougie teachers and we're over here. So what we did was come together in solidarity. And though the district tried to make us separate, we stayed together for the first time lockstep in our bargaining, because we were saying that if y'all don't get what y'all want, the teachers are not going back inside. And that was a first. I don't think they expected that. And by that same token, although we are a teachers union, we still show up for baristas. We show up for factory workers. We show up for the cafeteria workers. We have practiced solidarity in the city of Minneapolis for as long as I've been involved in this union, but it has totally ramped up. We are starting to see across all lines how important it is that we as laborers stick together and that we show support. And I got to be real with y'all. Support even looks like give to people strike fund, because it was really easy for me to make the thousands of dollars that I make and miss a paycheck or two. And it was a lot harder for someone who was already living paycheck to paycheck. Yep. So don't make people have to suffer in order to stand up for the rights of every other worker. And so that makes it easier. And so as a board member, as a leader in my union, when someone is bringing a motion for us to provide money for other people's strike fund, yes, we do. We make sure, because people did the same thing for us. Yeah. It's so important for us to make sure that rank and file members of a union are supported for the fight. I'm a retired veteran, right? In the military, and we talk about beans and bullets and blankets, those basic things that you need to worry about when you're about to do a movement, an initiative, a fight. And so when you're about to fight, make sure your people are taken care of, that are going to be on the front lines of that fight, so that you don't have attrition, that they'll have more incentive to hold their ground. I can't talk about that enough. I know we're short for time, but y'all, when we say solidarity, that's what it looked like. That's what it looks like.
That's fabulous. Yeah, if there's something more important than solidarity, I don't know what it is. And so I agree with you. Thank you so much for that. Our time is winding down, unfortunately, and I really appreciate you being generous with your time and stepping away from your occupation to talk to the Fight Back Radio listeners. Is there anything else you want to add that we haven't covered here that you want to leave us with before we end the interview?
I just want people to be aware that you will hear a lot of talk about how the movements that we are making in labor will not be effective because these conglomerates, these corporate overlords are doing too much to stymie us. In the end, no matter how much AI there is, no matter how much automaticity, technology, and machinations that are happening, in the end, they still need us to work. And having a solid union is so critical, that we understand that we still have inherent power, we have to be solid. We have to be in solidarity. Where there's people, there's power. I'll believe it to the day I die. Do not give up. Stay union strong.
All right. That's I can't think of a better way to end than that. So thank you so much, Marcia Howard.
Thank you so much. Y'all, solidarity.
Solidarity. Okay, so that was Marcia Howard. I know she had to run back to George Floyd Square where her shift in the occupation was going on. And I appreciate it, Marcia, for you taking time out to talk to Fight Back Radio. She, is such a busy person, and you could see the energy and the intelligence and the strategy and some of the things that she brings to our movement. So thank you so much, Marcia Howard. So for all, I also want to go back to, in the intro, I talked about the Tampa 4. If people can help out with them, we appreciate that. Also, I want to say to all of our Fight Back Radio listeners, feel free to contact us. Let us know what you're thinking. We appreciate that. We want people to subscribe and to follow us. But if you want to contact us, you can at richard.fightbackradio@gmail.com. That's richard.fightbackradio@gmail.com. And yes, please, give us a like, a follow, a reaction, whatever. All those things help people find us, and we appreciate that. I want to also thank our production team, who's just done a great job week in, week out, doing all the things that are necessary to make this podcast a success. Dodd McColgan, Vince Olson, and Shane Tremley. And for our entire Fight Back Radio team, I'm Richard Berg, saying until next time, all power to the people.